My name's Lou, though I don't fuss much over what people call me. Full name's Louis Parker, and I've been married to Sarah for 4 years now. We've decided not to have kids yet. Truth is, we enjoy our freedom a bit too much. Maybe that'll change later, but probably not until we're in our 30s. Both of us come from pretty modest backgrounds, just a few streets apart, but we didn't actually meet until we were 18 at a college recruitment fair. Sarah excelled in college, became an accountant and credit controller, while I struggled with school and didn't graduate. But I've always had a solid work ethic and a head for business. At 15, I started out cleaning local shops and offices, and by the time I turned 18, I was managing a team of 30 and had contracts with some major names in town. Sarah was looking for a job, and I needed more staff. So when she came up to my table at the event, she handed me her resume and said, "I'm not really after a cleaning job, but maybe you'd like my number?" I called her before she even reached the next booth and asked her out to dinner the next night. For years later, we were married. Thanks to that same event, Sarah got a job in the purchasing department of an engineering firm, starting at the entry level. After about 8 years, she worked her way up to oversee both the purchasing and credit control departments. With dual incomes and no kids, we were living pretty well. Meanwhile, my business kept growing. I ended up running the city's largest cleaning service after buying out a couple of competitors. One thing about this line of work is that cleaners and security guards often pick up on odd happenings around offices. About 4 months ago, I was at my desk when my secretary came in to say that a man was waiting for me in reception. She handed me his card. Ross Evans, private investigator. I told her to bring him in. Ross shook my hand, and after some polite talk, he asked if he could have some coffee. "I'm dying for a cup. Haven't had any all day," he joked. My secretary didn't need to be told twice and brought 2 cups from the machine, with milk and sugar set out, but neither of us actually took a sip right away. After a bit of small talk, I nudged him to get to the point. "So, Ross, how can I help you?" Ross got straight to it. "Please, just call me Ross. I'm a private investigator, hired by a client who thinks his wife might be cheating, or at least getting close to it. She's an accountant for Timmins Piping, which buys materials from an outfit called West Metals. West Metals recently hired a new salesman named Peter Black, a guy who's got a reputation for targeting married women. He's been sending flowers, leaving notes, and messaging my client's wife constantly. Now he's even pushing for an overnight trip. We've gathered quite a bit, but we need a few last pieces to complete the picture." The whole scenario caught my interest. It was like a scene out of a movie. I recognized the name West Metals. Sarah's company worked with them too. This Peter Black didn't sound like someone I'd want Sarah around, that's for sure. I looked at Ross, who seemed to be waiting for my response, so I asked, "I understand. What exactly are you asking for?" Ross leaned forward, smiling. "Simple. Black leaves notes, flowers, and other items on her desk. She reads them, then throws them away. Your cleaning crew can keep an eye out for any personal items from him, set them aside, and pass them to me. We'll handle it from there. Legally, there's no issue, and we already have her employer's authorization." He showed me a card with the CEO's contact info, so I gave the number a call. The CEO picked up right away and confirmed that Ross's request was approved, adding, "I'll send you a formal letter soon, but call if you need anything else." Then he hung up. "All right," I said to Ross. "We'll gather her trash separately. I'll check through it here, and you can pick it up every day at 11. Does that work?" "Perfect," Ross replied. I called the crew leader, and Ross explained what to look for: lunch breaks, flowers, notes, anything suspicious. For the next 6 weeks, we worked with Ross. Near the end, one of my staff noticed the woman hadn't returned after lunch, so we told Ross, who tailed her to a motel. Soon after, her marriage ended. Life and work moved on until a few weeks later when Sarah seemed a little out of sorts. I tried asking her about it, but she didn't say much. Then, one day, Donna, a longtime employee who's been with me from nearly the start, came to my office. Donna's a solid worker, like family, and treats me like her own son. She took a seat, looking uneasy. "Remember that job we helped with a few months back?" she asked. I nodded, curious. How could I forget? It was one of the more unusual requests. "Why?" She hesitated before saying, "Well, I'm working in the same building as your wife now. And that guy, Peter Black. He's been showing up at her office. I spotted a large bouquet of flowers on Sarah's desk and noticed she took them with her when she went to lunch. Donna, my longtime employee, handed me the card that came with the flowers. It read, "Dear Sarah, thank you for helping me renew my contract with your company. I can't express how grateful I am to you. Hope you'll join me for lunch so we can catch up. With love, Peter." The words froze me on the spot. The note made it clear this wasn't their first personal exchange, and whatever this was between them, it was getting way too close to crossing a line. I remembered from Ross that this guy, Peter Black, was notorious for his persistence and for targeting married women. Now, my wife had caught his eye. Thanking Donna, I asked her to keep a close eye and update me daily on anything new. If she found any other notes, I wanted them on my desk immediately. I wasted no time and dialed Ross's number. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey Lou, what's going on?" he greeted. Without delay, I relayed Donna's report. "One of my staff just briefed me. She used to be on night cleanup during your last case, but after it wrapped up, we reassigned her to daytime in my wife's building. Donna told me that the same Mr. Black is now making moves on Sarah, even inviting her to lunch. I've got a card and flowers from him right here," I said, feeling the frustration rise. Ross took a slow breath. "We're still looking into Mr. Black. You're actually the third husband involved currently. The other two didn't initially know who he was, but now they're fully on board and have agreed to share the expenses. Would you like to join them?" "Absolutely," I replied. "What's next?" Ross suggested I come to his office at 2 p.m. to meet the other husbands, fill out paperwork, and exchange information. I arrived promptly at 1:55. Inside, I found Dan Walters and Johnny Ashford, along with Ross and his partner, Mike Pearson, who was working on data for the case. Ross began the meeting. "Gentlemen, we're here because you three are dealing with a shared problem. Dan, Johnny, meet Lou. He's looking to join the investigation. If you're all comfortable, we'll get him registered as a client so information can be shared easily." The two nodded at me, and we all agreed. The paperwork took about 15 minutes, and I used my personal credit card to pay the $5,000 fee. No need for Sarah to see a statement. Then Ross addressed us as a group. "Our shared issue is Mr. Peter Black. Lou, just so you're up to speed, Dan's wife works with him at West Metals, and Johnny's wife is with the local school board, which buys materials from them. Mr. Black has a well-practiced routine: flowers, notes, lunch dates, and trying to get them to a motel after lunch. He loves targeting married women, often pressuring those with kids and encouraging childless women to ask their husbands for extra freedom. We know he enjoys letting husbands know he's got their wives wrapped around his finger. He even arranges weekend trips, only to cut things off later. Over the last year, he's caused at least 5 divorces in this area. Before here, he worked in Dallas, but he was fired after facing a class action lawsuit from 7 husbands for alienation of affection." Ross paused, then asked, "Lou, are you handling trash at West Metals or at the school board?" "We checked last time, but I want to confirm. If you're collecting trash from your wife's office, you're legally clear to keep any discarded items, unless there's some confidentiality agreement." I shook my head. "No, we don't handle either of those locations." "That's too bad, but no problem," Ross replied. "Keep gathering what you can from your wife's office." "Who covers her phone bill?" "My business does," I told him. Ross grinned and asked, "What model is it?" "Samsung," I replied. "Perfect," he said, handing me a form. "Complete this to authorize us to retrieve data from her phone. Then scan this QR code on her phone. It'll link to our server, where a program will install quietly. It'll forward calls, texts, emails, and WhatsApp chats. Black usually relies on mobile to avoid any accidental answering by spouses." The meeting ended with us all exchanging numbers and setting up a WhatsApp group with Ross and Mike for easy updates. When I got home, Sarah was already there, holding her phone close and looking preoccupied. During our chat, she excused herself to feed the dog but took her phone with her. Odd behavior. When I asked about her day, she only said she was tired and headed to bed at 9:30, earlier than usual. I stayed up, waiting until our usual bedtime, then went to find her phone. But it wasn't in its usual spot. Heading to the bedroom, I noticed a charging cord near the bed. When I looked closely, her phone was tucked under her pillow. Getting it out without waking her would be impossible, so I lay down, feeling uneasy. In the middle of the night, Sarah got up, giving me the chance to quickly scan the QR code, enter the details, and return her phone without her noticing. The next morning, she drifted around the house, seeming lost in thought, and only left for work after I prompted her. If I hadn't, I doubt she would have said anything at all. Around 11:30 a.m., Mike called from Ross's office. They'd finished going over the first data batch, and he began filling me in. Apparently, Sarah had set up a new email account, which seemed to be specifically for communicating with Peter. This actually helped us since we weren't aware of how they were contacting each other. Mike explained that Peter's messages were persistent and manipulative. He'd been urging Sarah to explore new experiences to add some spark to her marriage, convincing her that her loyalty to me wouldn't be affected. He used personal details she'd shared and twisted them to make her feel guilty, hinting that if she truly cared, meeting up with him wouldn't count as betrayal. I mentioned Sarah's odd behavior last night, how she'd been lost in thought, barely acknowledging me. I asked Mike if there were any new messages or plans for another lunch. Mike checked and read aloud the latest message, which had come through just that morning. "Let's meet for lunch at the Shore Club tomorrow. We can talk through a plan. Jake loves you, so if you're honest, he won't count it as cheating, right? You deserve this." Sarah had simply replied, "Okay." After ending the call, I leaned back, frustrated and unsure what to do next. Confronting her directly might not work. Peter seemed determined, and I had no doubt he'd keep pushing, maybe even trying to get her to a motel. This would either end with me stopping it or ending the marriage. I called Ross, exchanging a few quick greetings before laying it out. Peter's making his move, Ross, and he's even taunting me in these messages. If I confront her, he'll probably find a way around it. Maybe I need to consider filing for divorce. I paused, though I think I need a backup plan. I'm not sure what that would look like, though. What do you think? Ross was quiet for a moment before replying. A backup plan's a good call, but it may not be enough. This guy won't give up easily. If forgiving her isn't an option, divorce might be. I can get documents ready for your lawyer if you need, or recommend one. I have my own, thanks, I told him. He'd already helped draft a business agreement that protected my interests in case of divorce. I arranged a meeting with my lawyer for 9:30 the next morning. At his office, he looked at me knowingly. "All right, let's hear it," he said as I took a cup of coffee from his secretary. I explained, "Sarah's on the edge of crossing a line. A salesman at her office has been targeting her, and she's taken the bait. I'm working on a backup plan to stop it all, but if she does go through with it, I'll file for divorce." We spent an hour going over possible options. I leaned toward a straightforward divorce, splitting the business, selling the house, no kids to factor in, and skipping any legal action against Peter or his employer, which would be costly and likely unsuccessful. We shook hands, and he assured me he'd prepare all the necessary documents. The rest of the week, Sarah's mood was all over the place. One evening she'd be warm and affectionate, then barely acknowledge me the next. By Friday afternoon, Donna called to say Sarah had received another big bouquet of flowers along with a postcard, and that just confirmed it for me. As I prepared a message in our WhatsApp group, I noticed Ross had posted an update to Dan, inviting him to join him at a dinner at the Holiday Inn. They were hoping to catch Peter in the act there. I encouraged Dan to follow through, hoping he could get closure soon. I was so distracted that I kept fumbling things around the office. I let the group know about the flowers and the card's message, and Mike replied quickly, "I'll check her email now." A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Without hanging up, Mike told me to open my WhatsApp, where he'd sent a document. I pulled it up, a confirmation for a weekend hotel reservation at a lakeside resort about 30 minutes from town. It was a booking for a double room for that Friday and Saturday, with both Peter's and Sarah's names on it. When I got back on the line, I relayed what I'd seen to Mike, who sighed. "Yeah, but the emails are even worse. She's practically written out a guide for how they're going to pull this off, what to say and do." He promised to forward me the messages. Minutes later, I checked my inbox and opened a thread titled Weekend. It had started 2 weeks ago with Peter sending her a link to the hotel. As I read through the exchanges, the whole thing hit me hard. In the early hours of the morning, Sarah got up briefly, giving me just enough time to scan the QR code, enter the login details, and place her phone back without her noticing. The following day, she wandered around the house aimlessly before heading off to work. If I hadn't started a conversation, I doubt she would have said a word. Around 11:30 a.m., Mike called from Ross's office. They'd analyzed the first data set and had some concerning findings. Apparently, Peter had written to Sarah about how much he wanted to spoil her and suggested various ideas for entertainment. In later emails, he'd asked what she thought of his plans and implied I wasn't meeting her needs, pushing her toward him. In his final message, he outlined the hotel reservation and included a detailed script for her. Cook a lavish dinner on Thursday, keep up intimacy during the week, and tell me it was purely physical with Peter, but would enrich the marriage. He even told her to play on my feelings for her, leaving it to her to decide whether to follow through. I needed time to think. The weekend was filled with tension. I couldn't let on what I knew, but she was suddenly affectionate. We were intimate Friday night, then Saturday morning and evening, even into Sunday. By Monday morning, she initiated things again before I left for work. At 3 p.m. that day, Ross called to share more troubling news. She sent Peter a message, he told me, offering Thursday night for them to meet. She told him if he's not on board, she won't proceed, but if he agrees, she's in. Ross added that Peter replied, saying, "If you're nervous, remember, forgiveness is easier than permission." I thanked Ross and asked him to assemble a file with all the evidence. He asked if I wanted any photographs included. I agreed, and he confirmed he had a photo of them in an embrace, though nothing explicit. I told him to use that image as the cover page and forward the entire file to my attorney. Then I phoned my lawyer to give him a heads up and arranged for us to go over the file at breakfast on Saturday. I mentioned to him, few things ruin a breakfast like divorce papers. That Monday night, Sarah hinted at intimacy, but I declined, saying I had work to finish. I stayed in my office until 2 a.m. By the time I joined her, she was fast asleep. I fell into a deep sleep, waking up around 6 o'clock to get ready for work. Just as I was preparing to leave, a courier arrived with the folder. Seated in my office, I went through its contents, noting how expertly Peter played on Sarah's emotions. Ross had documented at least 7 marriages this man had wrecked over the last 18 months, along with a note from Dan detailing an ugly scene at the Holiday Inn. Dan's wife had run out in tears, prompting Ross to escort Dan home. They'd started counseling to try to repair things, especially for the sake of their young children. As I was reviewing the folder, my secretary, Kathy Atwood, came in. She'd been a loyal worker and, in recent days, a supportive friend. I decided to confide in her, sharing the whole story. She listened, then asked, "So what's your plan?" For the first time in days, I smiled. Kathy wasn't just my secretary. She was a friend, maybe even something more than I'd realized. I noticed, too, just how attractive she was, something I'd never paid attention to before. She returned my smile and, with a mischievous glint, said, "What's good for the goose is good for the gander." Then she suggested, "Why not arrange your own weekend, free of any obligations?" I laughed, but I couldn't deny the idea was appealing. And who would this dream woman be? I asked, though I already had a feeling. "With me, of course," she replied confidently. "Your loyal secretary says you deserve to clear your mind and enjoy yourself. It's just about unwinding, no strings attached." Send her a message letting her know. The plan was simple but effective. It would confront Sarah with her own behavior. That Tuesday night, I was intimate with Sarah but kept my emotions guarded. It was tough to do, and by Wednesday morning, neither of us wanted a quick encounter. By Wednesday night, things had started to feel tense between us, but only slightly. Thursday morning, as I headed out, Sarah woke up and asked about dinner plans. I ignored her question and left. Later that day, Ross called, informing me that Sarah had messaged Peter, boasting about preparing a special dinner for me and promising to update him afterward. To throw her off, I stopped by the store and picked up chicken, potatoes, fresh vegetables, and her favorite bottle of white wine. By 2:30 p.m., I was back home, and in 2 hours, I had everything set and baking in the oven. Just as I was popping the potatoes in, Sarah walked in with shopping bags and looked at me in confusion. "What's all this?" she asked. I grinned, looking her straight in the eyes. "Just making a nice dinner for my wonderful wife," I said warmly. Wanted to make tonight special, before we have a talk. Sarah's face was a mixture of confusion and surprise. She stammered, "Oh, I was planning to cook dinner too. But after we eat, I have something important to discuss. It's going to be a long night." "Of course," I replied, turning away with a slight grin. She had no idea I'd already set things in motion. Dinner was tense. I kept the conversation light, steering it away from any serious topics, encouraging her to enjoy the meal before we discussed my news. Once we were finished, I took the lead. "Bring your wine into the kitchen. Let's talk there," I suggested, and she followed. Earlier, I had discreetly placed a folder on the kitchen table, hidden under some magazines. Now, I pulled the magazines away, revealing only a printed document with her exact words and planned excuses. I began, "Sarah, you know I care for you deeply and would never want to hurt you. But we married young, and lately, I felt some inexperience on my part. My new secretary, Kathy Atwood, has been confiding in me, and her stories have been engaging. I feel like I could spend hours just listening to her. I need to clear her from my mind before we commit our lives entirely together. I've arranged a weekend with her. It's purely physical, just a way to let off steam and maybe pick up a few new tricks for us to try later. This doesn't change my love for you or our marriage. I'm telling you up front, so it won't be a betrayal. I trust your love for me will let me have this one weekend, knowing it won't impact us." Sarah's face turned red with fury, and she burst out, "Over my dead body. And I want that woman gone by Monday morning, or we're done." Relieved, I chuckled, watching her expression shift as realization dawned. She seemed to realize every excuse she had planned to use. I'd already anticipated. I calmly handed her the folder, flipping it open to reveal the photo of her kissing Peter on the cover. Her face went pale as she whispered, "You knew, and you played me?" I smiled and replied, "Yes, exactly. Your reaction is exactly what mine would have been if the roles were reversed. Unlike you, I didn't book a hotel room or plan anything. Kathy and I never shared lunch, let alone a kiss or an intimate conversation. My story was pure fiction. Yours, on the other hand, is very real." She flipped through the folder, taking in the evidence: dates, times, photos, emails, transcripts of messages. Her anger flared. "You spied on me. You invaded my privacy. How could you do this?" I remained calm. "That's all there is to it, Sarah. Time to face reality. You started an emotional affair, turned me into the fool, and we're about to make it physical. You humiliated me and jeopardized our marriage, yet you're angry at me for trying to save it? I thought we could work this out, but now, I'm not so sure." She looked stunned, then defensive. "How could I possibly have humiliated you? This had nothing to do with our marriage," she retorted, almost mechanically. "Why would this change anything?" "Listen to yourself, Sarah," I said, repeating her words back to her, then added, "If I'd told you the same thing, would you have accepted it? You said, 'Over my dead body.' So why is it okay for you, but not for me?" She took a shaky breath, as if preparing to speak, but I raised a hand. "There's no such thing as a free pass. If you go through with this, it's cheating, and nothing you say will change that." Avoiding my gaze, she murmured, "I can't deal with this right now. I need to be alone." With that, she abruptly stood up, grabbed the folder, and hurried upstairs. I heard the bedroom door close and the lock click. I tidied up the kitchen, then settled down at the table with the tablet Ross had given me. It let me monitor Sarah's phone activity, and as I logged in, I saw her messaging Peter. In her messages, she vented her frustration, telling him about the folder full of evidence I'd shown her, which included everything, even the hotel reservation. She was furious, feeling cornered. Peter tried to reassure her, urging her to go through with their plan and let love be her guide. He reminded her that it's easier to seek forgiveness than permission. Peter was persistent, trying to convince her, though she admitted her husband would never forgive her if he found out. He suggested that she pack her bag and bring it to work, so they could gauge my reaction from there. He made it clear that if she didn't take this chance, they might never get another one. Though she wavered, Sarah seemed swayed by his reasoning, and I could tell she was tempted to go through with it despite her misgivings. Sarah seemed to decide that if there was a real chance I might leave her, she wouldn't go through with the plan. The next day, she resolved to see Peter, thinking she could keep a level head. He knew just how to reassure her, though. I set down the tablet and tried to watch some TV, though my mind was elsewhere. I'd already decided to file for divorce on Saturday. There was a fleeting thought about delaying it, but once I started, there'd be no turning back. To show how serious I was, I called my lawyer and explained everything in detail. I told her I'd forgive her if she stopped, but she's planning to pack a bag and see how I react. I don't want to file for divorce unless they've actually gone through with it. Is there any way we can drive the point home? My lawyer, ever sharp, suggested we could send her a letter with a preliminary claim, making it clear she's planning to go away with him. If she does, divorce papers will be filed at the hotel Saturday morning. How about we expand the letter a bit and deliver it to her office? If her boss knows, he'd likely disapprove of this situation, and she mentioned Peter was picking her up for lunch, though we could arrange delivery regardless. An hour later, he sent me the draft. It was direct, including all the necessary details and clearly stating she'd be served divorce papers Saturday morning if she went through with it. I approved the plan and checked the tablet once more, but there were no new messages between Sarah and Peter. I decided to turn in for the night. When I tried to open the bedroom door, I expected it to be locked, but it wasn't. Inside, Sarah lay in bed, looking as though she anticipated some kind of romantic gesture. Against the wall, her packed bag caught my eye. I looked at it, sighed, and said, "So, you're choosing a quick getaway with Peter over our marriage?" Without waiting for her reply, I left the room and headed for the guest room. She pleaded as I walked away, but I said nothing. Lying on the bed fully clothed, I felt the weight of betrayal sink in. I knew Peter's words weren't her own, but seeing that bag ready for her meeting with another man, it cut deep. I stayed up most of the night, grieving and wrestling with a mix of loss and anger. The next morning, I heard Sarah moving around downstairs. I went back to our room to shower and dress, but noticed my own bag was missing. I wondered if she'd taken it downstairs and put it away. After getting ready, I followed the smell of coffee and bacon into the kitchen, where she stood nervously. She looked at me, clearly trying to gauge my reaction. I took a deep breath and told myself to stay strong. "This is nice," I said, gesturing to the spread she'd laid out. "I suppose this is your way of trying to show me what kind of wife you'll be if you decide to go off with him?" I paused, then added, "But it doesn't change a thing. If you go through with this, we're done." She looked stunned as I continued. "Tomorrow morning at breakfast, my lawyer and I will deliver the divorce papers. If you come home tonight, maybe we can try counseling and see if there's anything to save. But if you leave with him, don't even think of coming back." As I turned to leave, she whispered, "Please stay for breakfast. Let's talk this over." I looked back, shaking my head. "We've already had this conversation. That packed bag of yours says it all. I'm not having breakfast here. It's time you decide if you're capable of moving forward on your own. I assume your bag's already in the car?" She didn't deny it, instead turning away, and I left the house in silence. At least she now understood the gravity of what was happening. When I arrived at the office, Kathy gave me a sympathetic look. "You look terrible." I managed to smile. "And you look as stunning as always." Before she could ask any questions, I continued. "No clue what'll happen next." When I presented her with my plan, she lost it. She demanded I fire you. She even said, "Over my dead body." But this morning, she took matters into her own hands. And soon enough, she'll be getting a letter from me, spelling out her choices. Let's see if it sinks in. Kathy poured me a cup of coffee. I hope she comes to her senses. She can't honestly believe it's acceptable for her and not for you. I offered a sad smile and settled down, but it was an unproductive day. Around 11, my phone rang. It was Sarah, and her voice was choked with tears. "Are you serious? Are you really going to divorce me?" She had clearly convinced herself I wouldn't go through with it. Without hesitation, I replied, "If you betray me, you break our vows. You'd divorce me if I did the same, wouldn't you?" Her voice was barely audible, but I caught her whispered yes. Then, through a shaky breath, she asked, "Will you come home so we can talk?" I paused, then said, I'll be there in 20 minutes. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said simply, ending the call. I arrived home first, brewed a pot of coffee, and opened a window to let out the lingering smell of bacon she'd cooked earlier. Just as I poured myself a cup, Sarah came through the door, holding an envelope from the lawyer and her weekend bag over her shoulder. She set down her bag and froze, looking like she wanted to run toward me for an embrace, yet uncertain if it would be welcomed. I gestured toward the table, coffee in hand, and invited her to sit with me. I started off directly. So, are you still planning to go to the hotel? She glanced at the letter in her hand and replied with a mix of frustration and desperation. How can you even ask that after this letter? Of course, I'm not going. I love you. I want to be with you. You knew I wouldn't go through with it. So now, are we going to work on our marriage, or are you really going to serve me these papers? She sat down across from me, her eyes lowered. I reached across the table, lifting her chin so she'd meet my gaze. You'll only be served if you actually show up at that hotel. No hotel, no papers. But this has done real damage to us, and if we're going to fix it, here's what needs to happen. I paused, then continued. First, you'll call Peter right here, in front of me, and end it. After that, you'll disable and delete your personal email account that he's been using to reach you. Then, you'll tell your boss exactly what's been going on and request that Peter be kept out of your office from now on. After that, we're setting up counseling to work through this. We need to understand what led you here, why you thought I'd agree to it, and how we're going to rebuild trust. Just as I finished, her phone rang. It was Peter. She put it on speaker, and I heard him impatiently ask, "Where are you, Sarah? I'm waiting for you in the lobby. I can't wait all day." She took a slow breath. "Peter, I'm back home with Lou. He did something that woke me up. If I go with you, I'll lose my marriage, and I can't do that. I'm sorry, but you're not worth it." There was a brief silence, then he unleashed his anger. "You're a fool. You know that? Do you even realize how much I've put into this? Time, money, all for you. And now you're backing out when he throws a fit like some sulking child? You're just another lost cause. Go to hell," he spat before hanging up. For the first time, Sarah seemed to see him for who he truly was. We sat in silence as she deleted the email account, though it took her a bit of time to do so. Not long after, her boss and the HR manager, Kevin Woods, showed up at the door. Kevin didn't waste time. "Sarah," he began, "we know what's happened, and we're extremely disappointed. However, we're here to give you a chance to keep your position. Now, please explain what went on." She dabbed her eyes with a tissue and spoke up. "About 3 months ago, I was assigned to the AM Metals account, which Peter managed. He started coming by regularly, at first for work. Then he began complimenting me, first on my outfit, then my hair, then my figure. I started dressing to impress him, I guess. He'd bring me gifts, and eventually, he invited me to dinner. I went, and he turned the conversation to my marriage, questioning my happiness, calling Lou unworthy of me. It wore me down. Eventually, he proposed a weekend getaway, and, well, Lou intervened with a letter. That snapped me out of it, and I told Peter it was over." Kevin glanced at the CEO, who gave a nod, then turned to Sarah. "Well, Sarah, we appreciate your honesty. It was a severe lapse in judgment, but you're fortunate to keep your job. We've also had issues with AM Metals, so we're terminating their account. Peter will be permanently removed from the premises, so you won't see him here again. But let's be clear. If anything like this happens again, you'll be dismissed." She nodded, barely whispering, "Yes, I understand." They left, and we had a quiet lunch together. Later, we managed to find a counselor and set up an appointment for the next day, which was Saturday. That night, I reached over, took her hand, and led her to the bedroom. We shared a moment that was deeper than it had been in a long time. I woke around 5 a.m. to a soft, tender touch from Sarah. It felt like we were starting fresh, with nothing but each other. Counseling sessions brought a lot to light. Sarah came to understand that Peter had preyed on her fears of our life growing stagnant. She also realized how she had unintentionally fed him information he could use to manipulate her. As for me, I saw clearly that Peter's antics had been nothing more than a game to him, and I realized how much richness we already had in our lives together. Over the next 3 months, we worked through everything, layer by layer. 4 years have passed since then, and we're as close as ever. Sarah is now expecting our first child. As for Peter, he had an unfortunate fall at the local shopping center while walking down to the parking garage. It's still a mystery how it happened, but at least 5 husbands were in the mall that day, all dressed in black caps and jackets. We sat around, occasionally switching seats, and even the police couldn't get any details from us. I don't know who was responsible, but I swear, one of us made sure Peter would never ruin another family.